Hello, well, it's nearly Halloween. The room is dark. Horror movies are in your minds. So popular horror movies are the science fiction one where giant spaceships come down and they suck the energy out of the planet and they destroy cities and farmland. And you've got zombies walking around. There may be some in the back row. But actually, these are not imaginary. We actually have been sucking the energy out of the planet from coal and oil and gas and polluting the atmosphere and polluting people's breathing. We have giant ships going around the oceans, grabbing up the sea, dragging chains across the seabed, grabbing huge nets that are so big you can put houses and buses inside these nets. They're enormous. Thousands of kilometers of hooks. And that's over 70% of the planet where actually have these machines going around, just taking stuff up, but no prior assessment of their impact or whatever. And the zombies are the ideas that stop these things happening, that stop the improvements happening. So everybody knows that the global fishing, the way it's been going on, is largely unsustainable. It's economically not justified because it's subsidized by governments so that people can keep fishing in this destructive way. And it's ecologically unsustainable because you're damaging the food webs. We've known this for decades. So the only solution that I think is possible is to stop fishing in some places. And this has been proven, and I'll show some slides. But this is not possible because so many people have these out-of-date ideas about the problems that this will cause and so on, which I call zombie ideas. So the lesson is we have to kill these zombies to move ahead. So I think with Halloween coming up, the zombie theme is very appropriate. So one of the things that you should see is that marine protected areas exclude people. This is nonsense. This is the first marine reserve in New Zealand in 1975. So many people went there, completely unexpected, that they had to create more marine reserves because you couldn't park on the roads in the summertime. And there's a program called Experiencing Marine Reserves where they take school children and adults, and there's over 70,000 have now been taking snorkeling inside and outside reserves and just witnessing the difference. It's obvious to everybody. You don't need more science to convince people it's a good idea. And they're not a radical idea. There's many areas we set aside for the public good, and the ocean is already a public resource. It's not a private resource. We have lots of areas on land for schools and hospitals and sports fields and so on, railway lines, roads. And people are already excluded from many areas of the ocean, like harbours and military zones, cable zones and so on. So actually marine protected areas are not a radical idea in the sea. They're actually a much safer and simpler idea. And they're not expensive. The other things, they're going to cost money. Well, they only cost money if you've been doing nothing in the ocean so far. And in many parts of the world, there's virtually no management of ocean resources. And that's why it costs money to start doing something to protect them. And many of the biggest marine protected areas in the world are actually in countries which are developing countries. So these are countries with very little resources, but they get it that it's common sense to protect everything and then say what people can take, not to take everything and then worry about the consequences later. And most indigenous peoples around the world have words in their own language for areas where you don't go fishing for various different reasons. So there's a thing called the precautionary principle, which you don't hear about much anymore. All the countries in the world signed up to it some decades ago, but we don't apply it in the ocean. And this is just a quick map. There's all the areas in red around these areas. The light blue are the exclusive economic zones of countries. But you can see that many of these biggest areas are around the Pacific Islands, the Indian Ocean Islands, and so on. And these people get it. You know, they want to protect their resource. So they're not doing it out of some philosophical reason just to protect nature. And it's also reasonable to think that if an area is protected, it's protected. Like if you protect the people using police and things, people are protected. If you protect nature, it'll be protected. And that there's a world database that all the countries log in their data about their protected areas. You would assume then that these areas are protected. But I show two graphs here, and because this is actually not true. On the left axis is the number of protected areas. The top one is areas on land, and the bottom one is areas that are marine and some that are land and sea together. And the top line on the graphs is the partly or partially protected areas. So we don't know what's protected there, but basically they allow fishing more or less. and the fully protected areas are the bottom line, and this gap is getting wider. So as countries say that they're creating more marine protected areas, they're actually just calling places more protected. They're not really protected at all. Over 90% of the marine protected areas in the world don't even aim to stop fishing. And they only occupy only about 2% of the ocean. So we really haven't started protecting the ocean. And the other myth is then they stop commercial fishing. And if you try to sell this idea to people in the Pacific Islands or other indigenous communities, say you can't fish to provide food for people. They'll think you're crazy. But you can fish for sport. So fishing recreationally is a rich person's privilege. It's not something that most indigenous communities would even think about. But actually, indigenous communities going back thousands of years have been shown to overfish areas and overhunt animals on land as well. So fishing for recreational is often allowed in areas, such as areas very close to where we are now, but it's not harmless, and it has the opposite effect of what was intended, because it then attracts more people into fishing the area, because they think there must be more fish there because there's no commercial fishing. So you end up with actually more fishing pressure. We did a review paper last year. I found 51 studies that estimated the impacts of marine protected areas on fisheries. Of those 51, 46 showed fishery benefits outside the areas, and most of these areas were 91% of these areas did not allow fishing in them. So most of the places that benefit fisheries don't allow fishing. It sounds contradictory. So I can understand why people think it doesn't make sense. And not one of these areas showed a decrease in fishery catch. And I've consulted thousands of people around the world, there's various email networks, and I could not find one example of a fishery that lost fish due to a marine protected area being created. And you can see on the top map here with these countries in blue, these are the countries all these examples come from. So this is not an idea that's unique to one place. This is a general pattern that happens all over the world. Surprisingly, if you stop killing things, they actually flourish and they grow bigger. Even in this example in the Great Barrier Reef, a paper published earlier this year. So it's quite surprising that in the Great Barrier Reef of Australia, they have 766 places where you're not allowed to fish. That's more than all of Europe. And they were designed systematically, so they include different kinds of habitats and species. And fishery outside these is very well managed. The Great Barrier Reef is intensively managed by the government. And yet, those areas occupy 30% of the area, but they contribute more than half of the fish to the wider area. So even in well-managed fisheries, protected areas have a benefit. They also have benefits for tourism. Again, some examples in the literature of these protected areas often provide more jobs, more employment, and more sustainable use of resources than prior activities. And the larger the areas, and the older they are, the greater the economic benefits. And you'll see the scale on the left axis is a log 10 axis. So that's millions of dollars, going up to billions of dollars in some cases. And the other idea that's criticised as protected areas, well, you say if you stop fishing here, all the fishermen will fish elsewhere and there'll be heavier fishing elsewhere. They call this fishery displacement. And this has been around for a long time. Many scientific papers state as if it was a fact, but nobody ever looked at it to see was it a fact. So the previous example suggests that maybe it's not a fact because you have this spillover benefit. But another global study came out this year in one of the top journals. And I just simplify it on this graph here. I show the distance along the bottom axis is inside the protected area, 100 kilometers, 200, 300 kilometers away from it. So you'd expect that the fishing pressure would be much higher immediately outside the protected area because the ships would have moved outside. But that's not actually the case. So this is a very contradictory result. Why are the fishing boats fishing less outside around the protected area than they are further away? Well, the reason is because they catch their catch and their quota so fast outside the protected area that they have to go home because they've caught all the fish they need. So it's actually the spillover benefit is actually reducing the economic cost of fishing because they don't need to be fishing so long to catch enough fish. And this idea of having partly protected areas is sort of a compromise, which I think we can all understand. We all like to compromise. But actually, it doesn't really work. And even in Australia, they did a study where they asked people along the coast, what do they think of the areas that are fully protected, partly protected, and unprotected? And people couldn't really see any benefit of the partly protected. And everybody, even the fishermen and others, really valued the fully protected areas. They say that's a safe resource. It's like money in the bank that's earning interest. And these other areas we can fish. So this idea of a partial protection is really a bad idea. So it doesn't work. It doesn't work in medicine. It doesn't work in public health. It certainly wouldn't work if you're running a business. You don't want to get partly paid. And it doesn't work in nature conservation. Surprise. Yeah. So these are the zombie ideas that I talk about. First I didn't put the knots in this slide because I thought they were all the zombie ideas, so I have to rephrase them. So protected areas don't exclude people. Maybe a few do in the world where you've got some a place on land where there's a really sensitive species or plant and you have to manage the number of people there. And in fact, in many places in the world, protected areas become so popular, you have to manage the number of people going in and out. If you travel globally, you'll find many national parks, you need a permit to go in. But that's because they're very popular. And so it's not a radical idea, it's not expensive, it does not reduce the fishing catch, it actually increases it, it doesn't displace fisheries. And if you want marine protected areas to benefit fisheries, then fishing is not okay inside them. And recreational fishing is not okay. And pelagic fishing, people think if you just catch the fish on the surface water, that's okay. But that's not okay either. Those fish are connected to the whole ecosystem. So if we want our planet to move from the past situation that many thousands of people have been causing these problems over the years, we're all going to have a role in trying to fix these problems. We want areas that move from largely unprotected in the ocean to better managed and protected, to benefit for whatever reasons we have, whatever benefits we want. Of course, there's some people that benefit from business as usual, and they don't like these changes, so they'll be lobbying not to have any change. That's always the case with any type of political or social activity. And I think this can only be done through a network of marine reserves where there's no fishing around the world. And they don't have to occupy a lot. There's a suggestion in Europe that it would be 10% of the area. 10% is not very much, but you'd swear sometimes you go to a meeting that you're asking for 90% because people object so strongly. I think that's my last comment. So I think we can all make the planet a better place by realizing that some ideas that are floating around are zombie ideas and we should kill them. Thank you.